Hi everybody and welcome back to another lesson. This time we are working with perfect squares, perfect cubes, and their roots. So again, some of this is going to be a review for you. So we should know by now that a perfect square is a whole number that can be represented as the area of a square with a whole number side length. So basically that's just saying that perfect square is any number that has the same side length. It can be represented by the same length. So here we have an area of 25 square units. That means that the length of that square is 5 by 5. Okay, obviously it's a square, so you have to have the same length. So the square root is going to be that side length of the square. So the square root is 5 units. So if we were talking about 25 being a perfect square, and we take the square root of that, the square root is 5. Okay? We also work with perfect cubes. So a perfect cube is basically just a number that can be represented as the volume of a cube, and that it has a whole number edge length. So if we look at this volume of this cube, it has a volume of 216 cubic units, which gives us a side length of 6 units. So if we take the cubed root of 216, we end up with 6. Okay, so 216 is the perfect cube, and then 6 is its cubed root. So I think that should be a review for you. What's going on here? Sorry. So for example 1, we're going to be asked to determine the square root of 1,764. Now, what you can easily do is you can just take the square root of that on your calculator, but I'm going to be asking you to do these things without your calculator. So in order to do this without our calculator, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to that prime factorization that we learned in yesterday's lesson. So I've just broken it down into 2 pieces at once. So you can see the work there. So I started off just dividing by 2 and then again by 2. Then I divide by 3 and then by 7 and then by 3 and by 7 again. So now what I want to do is I'm going to list all those prime factors again. So I've got 2, 2, 3, 7, 3, and 7. And I'm going to just put them in order so that all the numbers are grouped together. And because I'm working with a square root, okay, what I want to do is I want to create equal groups of 2. So this one actually works out quite nice. So you can see that we have a group of 2 here, a group of 2 here, and then a group of 2 here. Now, similar to yesterday, what we're going to do when we group these is we're just going to end up removing one of those numbers from each group. So we take a 2, we take a 3, and then we take a 7 to find out that the square root of 1,764 is 42. So if you want, you could test that in your calculator just by hitting that square root button and then entering that number, or vice versa, depending on your calculator, and you would come up with that same answer. But again, I'm going to be asking you to do that without using your calculator, so it's important to know how to use prime factorization to do that. So our next example has us finding the cubed root of a number. So again, we're going to do that same prime factorization until we get down to 1. So now I have a 2, 2, a 2, 7, 7, 7. Sorry, this is hit the wrong button there. So now I've got a group of 3 2s and a group of 3 7s. Because we're finding a cubed root, that means that we're going to make groups of 3. So we've got one group of 3 there, one group of 3 there, and then just like we did in our previous example, we're just going to remove 1 from each of those groups, and we find that the cubed root is equal to 14. Okay, so square root, we're looking for groups of 2. Cubed root, we're looking for groups of 3. Okay, because a cube has length, width, and height. So that's why we're taking groups of 3, whereas a square just has length and width, if you want to call it width, okay? So our last example, we're told that a cube has a volume of 12,167 cubic feet, and we're asked to determine what the surface area of the cube is. So we need to think about a few things here. We're given the volume, and we're asked to find the surface area of the entire cube. So there's going to be a few steps that we have to do here. First thing that we want to think about is, or remember, is that volume in a cube is going to be equal to length times width times height. Okay? If it's a cube, that means that each length, width, and height should be equal. So we can say that length would equal width would equal height. And again, that's because a cube is made up of sides that are squares. A square has the same length and width, which would also make it the same height. So we know that if we take the cubed root of the volume, we're going to get the length. Our volume, we're told, is equal to 12,167. So in other words, the cubed root of 12,167 is equal to what? Again, we can put it in your calculator, but we're not working with our calculators just to simply solve this. Okay, we want to do a little bit of math there. So we're going to do the prime factorization, and the greatest prime factor that this is divisible by is 23. So you're going to need to use a little bit of guess and check, okay, in some of these questions. So you're going to guess and check. You're going to find that it's divisible by the prime factor of 23 to get 529. 529 is also divisible by 23. Then we end up with 23 here. So we know our last step is going to be to divide by 23. So our prime factors are 23, 23, and 23. So we should know that the length is going to be equal to 23. That's because we are working with a perfect cube. So we take our group of 3, and then we just remove 1 to get the value. Okay, so the cubed root of that is 23. So we haven't answered the full question. Okay, we've determined what the length is, but now we need to figure out what that surface area is. So in order to do that, we need to figure out what the surface area is of one face on the cube. So again, envision a dice, okay? And remember that the surface area of one face on a dice is length multiplied by width. We know that our length from down here was 23. So we take our length multiplied by that same width to get 23 to the power of 2, which equals a surface area of 529. Okay, now that's just for one side. We should know again by this point that a cube has 6 sides. So the last step is to multiply by 6. Multiply by 6, and then the surface area is going to be 3,174 feet. Okay, so that's all that I have for today's lesson. Hopefully that was fairly clear, especially given the fact that we're building on some previous knowledge as well as 3.1. So I'll see you in class tomorrow. Have a good night.